Hey guys, James Brown with Barton Springs Mill here for your next episode of Ask Your Miller Mondays. Hey guys, welcome to our third episode of Ask Your Miller Mondays. We've got some great questions today. I'm going to jump right in. First question, are any of your products kosher? Regrettably, they are not currently. I remember when I was looking into getting into this business and I was researching regional grain mills, I saw a brief documentary on a farmer, I believe it was in upstate New York, or at least on the eastern seaboard or coast, that was working with a rabbi to certify his grains, and the rabbi was actually out walking ahead of the combine. I have not pursued that yet. From my old days of working as a worship director in the church, I have rabbi friends. I should probably reach out to them and see what can be done about maybe pursuing that. But that's a great question. It has been on my list of things to research. And so that question will bump it up the list. So I'll start looking into that in a little more depth. Uses for type 85 or type 65 flour. If you've read through our Q&A, you've sort of seen my feelings about 85% extraction flour. I don't really think you need it. I think if you're going to use 85% extraction, you might as well use whole wheat. The reason being that our stone mills do an incredibly good job of fracturing the bran into teeny tiny pieces. So when we pass our flour through the screens that normally are industry dictated for determining what our extraction is going to be for 85% extraction flour, we almost have nothing left behind. We're making everything into such small pieces, there's really nothing to remove. And the concern seems to be with larger particles disrupting the formation of the gluten. And we just don't see that in our bake tests or see that with any of our wholesale clients. So I don't think it's warranted. Now, we have some people that simply insist on it, and we have the screens to do it, and we can make it. But I'm not a personal fan of 85% extraction. 65% extraction, I think, is a nice vectoring of cost and performance when you're wanting something a little whiter, a little lighter textured flour for your finished products to be a little lighter in texture. That bran absorbs a lot of water, and that can equate to a heavier texture in your baked goods. 00 is approximately 55% extraction, so we're really removing, virtually half of the weight of the wheat berry to make that kind of white flour. 65% is just backing off of that a little bit. I think it has a little more flavor. You largely get the same performance that you get from the 00. And because there's more wheat berry left behind, it's not as expensive to make, which means I don't have to charge as much money for it. So I think that's a great vectoring of, as I said, performance and price. Now you're all going to start ordering 65, and I'm going to have to get more options on the website. What is the mineral content of your flours for T45, T55? How do you measure it, and does it differ with each grain? That's a really interesting and complex question. In the very beginning, I was really concerned about our ash content. For those of you that don't know, ash content is measured by taking a sample of flour, putting it in a crucible, and incinerating it for a large number of hours until you've completely incinerated the flour. There'll be some residue left behind, and that is all mineral content. And that method of measurement is used to determine how much of the bran is remaining in the flour after milling and presumably sifting or bolting, whatever term you choose to use. And so especially lots of European bakers want to know the ash content of our flours. And this particular test sent me into an existential funk when I first got started milling, because most of our flours end up, even our 00 flours end up being over 1.1% ash, which means there's still quite a bit, a substantial amount of bran left. In the case of 00, it's there, but it's just very, very fine. And so I had this existential crisis. What kind of miller do I want to be? Well, if I want to make flours that have less ash in them or a lower ash content, I'm going to have to resort to tempering, which is wetting the wheat and letting it set to toughen that bran layer, adapting our stone mills to take off that bran in larger sheets so that it's easier to sift out. And even that may not do what we want. Really, the only way to do that is to roller mill. And if you're going to do that, then you're going to remove all of the bran, all of the germ, including the germ oil. And at that point, I'm making a flour that I didn't really set out to make in the first place because I wanted flours that were bold and flavorful and had rich aromatics. And those types of flours tend to be far more neutral in flavor, color, and aroma. So the question was, do I want to make that kind of flour? Should I be chasing that particular dream? And the answer is no, I don't. So once I got over that, we stopped measuring ash content. It's not a cheap test to run. So we just stopped doing it and I stopped worrying about it. I hope that's a satisfactory answer. Let's see what else we got here. Do you deal with flour weevils and other critters? Any advice on storing to prevent them? You bet we do, because the reality is they're on every grain that comes into any flour facility. And how a particular facility deals with them may vary greatly. I know that's going to make a lot of squeamish people uncomfortable, but it's just a reality. You've just harvested this wheat. It came out of a field where there are all sorts of alive organisms, from microscopic to things with 4 legs and tails. And the unfortunate reality is you're going to bring those in with the wheat harvest, and you're going to have to figure out a way to deal with those. So the first thing is to just get over that notion that there's some magical field somewhere where things are being grown in a sterile environment. That's just not the case. How do we deal with it here? We're using it's not really a new technology, except it's new in the scale that we're applying it, which is modified atmospheric packaging. If you've ever seen a brick of coffee at the store, or a brick of maybe arboreal rice, it's perfectly square and it's under vacuum. That's modified atmospheric packaging. And that particular technology uses a vacuum, sometimes or many times in tandem with some sort of flush gas that makes the inside environment of that bag or container inert. In our instance, we're using CO2. So this machine that we use is made by the VQM company out of the Netherlands, allows us to modified atmospheric package 2-ton totes of grain. So we take the large tote, it has an eyelet on each side. We lift it up with the forklift. We put a special foil bag around that and then heat seal it shut. And then we hook it up to a machine that then pulls a vacuum and also then flushes with CO2. All of the white papers that I can find based on this modified atmospheric packaging of grain say 10 days at 80 degrees Fahrenheit, you will have total kill at all life stages: eggs, larvae, and adult insects. And so that is what we do with all of the grain in our facility. If you look back through our Instagram page, you can see these happy posts that I make sometime in August or so, when finally the whole warehouse is blue. We've managed to get everything map packaged for the year, and we can sort of put that away. Now, we will, as a safety stop, sort of go and remap things. If we're using a particular tote of something that moves slowly, we'll remap that every 2 to 3 weeks. We just want to make sure that nothing gets into that. We have grain coming into the facility all the time, particularly for brewing and distilling, and you can have stowaways in those totes. So we want to make sure everything in our facility gets mapped regularly and that we don't have any sort of infestation. Now, does that mean that you're never, ever going to receive a product from us that might end up having something in it. I'd love to say that that's true, but I'd be lying to you. That would not be true. I think we do an extremely good job in the number of returns we have or complaints we have about bug infestation are almost non-existent, but it does rarely happen. It's regrettable. We take steps to deal with that, and we always say that your satisfaction is guaranteed, so we always refund your money or provide you with a replacement. But these things are living, and they come out of a living environment, and they are remarkably resilient. In a roller mill, large industrial scenario, they use something called an intillator. So they're required to count bug parts per million in their flour. It's a regulation, a government regulation. And so that should tell you something right there, which is that this is commonplace. However, what they'll do is they'll measure the number of bug parts per million after milling, but before they send it to a device called an intillator. An intillator is simply a hard surface, usually steel, at which they propel the flour at a very high rate of speed, which will virtually explode into millions of tiny pieces any living organisms that are still inside that flour. So you can imagine if they're counting bug parts per million, they want to measure that before they send it to the intillator, because one bug fractured into 1,000 pieces is still 1,000 parts per million. It's a very effective way of doing it. It's not very reasonable or sustainable at our scale, and the CO2 is working remarkably well for us. We even have one farmer now who is storing grain in bins on nitrogen and generating his own nitrogen, which is extremely effective. So these ways are organic, chemical-free. We're not using diatomaceous earth, which is one organic alternative, or any sorts of storicides, which are by no means organic. So it's a much safer, natural way to preserve these grains without insects, and I would say largely effective. I hope that answers your questions today to your satisfaction. I'm really enjoying answering these questions. Keep them coming, and we'll see you next Monday. Thanks.